Against the backdrop of rugged mountains, a warrior with a huge axe stood before the trio. He was skeptical of their words about searching for someone to nurture and guide, and so he immediately doubted their true intentions, carefully studying the figures standing before him. Then the stern, hard-eyed fighter added a warning. He declared that, for all their strength, they lacked an understanding of the world, and demanded that they forever remember his appearance and presence, as if it would serve as a lesson for the future. Then messengers rushed into the ranks and reported the unbelievable. The kingdom's renowned knight Sir Boyden Portupongovina, known as the Flaming Whiskers, had been felled by a single blow from a woman's fist, and the news spread through the ranks, leaving everyone stunned. Then Ryon stepped forward, introducing herself as the Dragon King and Warlord of Destruction of Dragonia. She hesitated for a moment, trying to remember the other man's name, and ended up addressing him by a distorted nickname, as if her memory had played a cruel trick on her. Ludmila then gave vent to her irritation, complaining that she hadn't had enough time to properly discipline her target. Afterward, she introduced herself as High Elf and Archmage of Disaster, Ludmila Hailstorm, making it clear who they were dealing with. Meanwhile, Telemaya, with a sly smile, noted that their luck seemed to have run out, since they were not meeting a single worthy man on their way who could attract their attention even for a moment. So the three most powerful mentors gathered together. One, without hesitation, declared the latest candidate unfit, the other made it clear she saw no point in wasting her energy on training him, and all three emphasized that their power stood alone in the entire world. Then Telemaya decided to go beyond words and demonstrated her strength in action. Her fist struck the enemy with such force that it seemed as if the mountains themselves were shifting under the force of the movement. After this, Ludmila calmly leaned on her staff and explained that a true magical genius could wipe out tens of thousands of soldiers with a single spell. Behind her, one of the soldiers froze, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. A little later, a dark-haired figure stepped forward and introduced herself as a mysterious beauty. She stated without a shadow of a doubt that her debilitating and reverse restoration magic allowed her to inflict genuine carnage, leaving no chance for her victims. Soon, a furious cry from an armored fighter was heard, as the woman with a flowing cloak and staff was already walking away. At that moment, it became clear that there was something even these three could not achieve. After a pause, Ludmila inquired about the cause of the tension. Telemaya, covering her mouth, objected that it was unthinkable to even consider the participation of the most ancient and powerful people, while Sariella watched from the sidelines, sensing growing uneasiness. Then a man fell from the sky, and the two companions immediately exchanged barbs. One lamented that virginity doesn't help find a partner, the other noted that rude people are easiest to simply ignore. Meanwhile, the conversation returned to the past. Several months ago, Telemaya had confidently asserted that they were too strong for Ryon, reproaching the others for having nothing but looks and words, though someone did acknowledge the presence of at least one worthy candidate. After that, she strictly outlined the rule. Anyone who wants to become her lover must be no weaker than her, or at least equal in rank, because she will not tolerate anything else. Later, they discussed how Ludmila would need to be protected if someone special came into her life. They all agreed that these exceptional women's demands on men were unattainable. Then Telemaya wondered if anyone strong with a suitable personality even existed. Ryon snapped that it was just a fantasy. Ludmila made it clear she wouldn't let Telemaya get ahead, and Kroos accused her of being afraid of coming in second. It was then that a bold thought struck all three of them. If they couldn't find a man to their liking, then they could raise him themselves. The determination in their gazes became almost palpable. Thus began the hunt for a future husband. Two figures stood on the cliff edge, one pointing forward, the other looking up, where a group of men was already appearing above them, as if marking the beginning of a new stage. Sometime later, the two women sat drinking tea under a large umbrella in a sunny courtyard, discussing how their search for the apprentice had once again proved fruitless. Then one of them casually suggested changing direction and heading to the Empire of Uruk, as if it were the most natural next step. Telemaya explained without further ado that they were specifically interested in recruiting criminals from that country. Ryon then remarked that such a choice would inevitably attract many self-proclaimed heroes eager to challenge them, while Ludmila calmly sipped her tea, casually noting that the veterans had already exhausted their potential for growth. Afterwards, one of those present mentioned that a descendant of the Brave One had enrolled in the school. The blonde woman immediately recalled an old rumor about a man who had once defeated the devil, and two others immediately perked up at the news related to the educational institution in Bascarubia. The conversation then turned to the long-standing tradition of the Adventurers School to find a reliable partner there to produce strong children in the future. Someone remarked that for him, it was also a convenient opportunity to find a wife while still working. Then one of the men offered two options: either take this descendant as his student or intercept one of his rivals who were also studying at the school without missing out on a profitable opportunity. After a short pause, Ludmilla confidently announced that the decision had been made. Telemia added that she personally knew the dean, while Rion listened silently to the conversation, remaining slightly behind and not interfering. Soon, Sariella and Telemea were floating effortlessly in the air, and the girl in black, apparently Ryan, calmly remarked that the trip was definitely worth the effort. Then, before them, the fortified city of Baskrubia lay, seen from above. This city was considered a sacred place for adventurers, as it housed the world's largest source of magical energy and was governed by the Adventurers Guild. Almost immediately, a cheerful voice rang out through the streets, announcing the annual Bountiful Harvest Festival. All adventurers were invited to eat their fill and enjoy the festivities without shame. Meanwhile, the boy excitedly tugged at the dark-haired man's hand, urging him on, as the profession ceremony had already begun in the amphitheater. A dense crowd moved slowly against the backdrop of the old buildings. At that moment, Sariella suddenly tensed, breaking out in a sweat upon hearing that the vagabonds were about to drop in. Her gaze betrayed intense concentration and poorly concealed anxiety. She then flared up in anger and demanded an explanation as to whether they were trying to deceive her. Cross, standing in the spacious hall, sternly demanded confirmation that the names in the documents were genuine, not hiding his tension. After that, the hooded man calmly explained that the oppressive presence that could be felt around belonged to 3 S-class warriors, and there was not a shadow of doubt in his voice. Then the agitated man burst into a shout, unable to contain his irritation, and the hooded figure added, just as calmly, that people were currently enjoying tea cakes in his office without permission. Kroos, looking extremely collected, declared that he was too busy guarding the Bountiful Harvest Festival to interfere. However, another man immediately insisted that he come up with an excuse and leave immediately. Meanwhile, Telemaya, reclining in her chair with obvious confidence, warned that if they delayed any longer, the school building would be lost. The serious-looking man below gave a hesitant, visibly hesitant assent. Then Sariella grimaced in pain and angrily called herself insignificant. After that, she abruptly decided to leave somewhere in 30 minutes, ordering sedatives and stomach-restoring magic to be prepared, causing confusion among those around her. A little later, she firmly stated that the decision to expel him was final and not subject to discussion, demanding that it be accepted as is. The young man, on the other hand, visibly hesitated and admitted that he needed time to collect his thoughts. Following this, Kroos rushed forward in a rage, demanding to know why they were in the city and why he had been expelled. Someone nearby hesitantly tried to call out to him, but he didn't slow down. Then he stopped in front of the massive door, desperately hoping that everyone involved had already returned to where they came from. Deep down, a fear grew that it had all been a deception from the very beginning. Eventually, they noticed Solaria's late arrival. One of her companions immediately teased her about how, due to her long absence, all the tea cakes had long since been eaten, and at that moment, Solaria silently admitted that everything that had been happening had indeed been true. He wondered why they were all gathered there, but they immediately reminded him that it was he who had kept them waiting, and asked him if he had forgotten how many times they had helped him out before, when the situation was much worse than it was now. After this, Sariella harshly criticized the S-class adventurers, stating that despite their resounding exploits, the guild members regularly had to deal with the consequences of their actions, and no amount of merit could cancel that out. Then she adjusted her glasses, narrowing her gaze to a cold, focused expression, and explained that the densely populated area and the sheer number of residents required extreme caution. After weighing the situation, she decided to quickly conclude her business and return immediately. Meanwhile, Telemea smiled slyly and began listing everything necessary, first mentioning the descendant of the brave. After that, she considered which step would be most sensible to begin her plan. Sariella, feeling sweat break out on her back, tried to understand the meaning of the request, but Telemea calmly explained that the brave one would soon arrive to begin training, and they intended to keep an eye on anyone who showed hidden potential. Then Sariella listened to the rest of the words with a stony face, while Ludmilla softly, almost carelessly, asked to let them look at the future candidates, saying this with her eyes closed and a slight smile. Tension grew within Sariella. She suspected that the 3 smug and self-absorbed individuals lounging nearby were clearly up to something, and their claims of caring for the younger generation didn't inspire confidence. Afterwards, the cloaked figure warned darkly that the world would be destroyed if the so-called trump card of the human race, or the treasure of Armeria, fell into the wrong hands, and his words hung heavy in his mind. He clenched his fist, determined not to let them meet, while she asked warily why there was such a sudden silence and whether they were planning to keep everything that was happening a secret from the others. Then Telemea stopped at the window and without hesitation decided to interrogate one person, while Ludmila, sitting nearby, advised them both to maintain good relations with the dean in order to avoid unnecessary problems. The next moment, the tower collapsed, drowning in smoke and debris. Someone shouted that things were taking a turn for the worse, and Crows, finding himself on the ground, was stunned, wondering what was happening. Sariella, feeling the tension grip her body, realized they were facing a poison slime hydra. She immediately warned that only a squad of A-class adventurers could handle such an opponent, as it was a level 8 monster. Then, looking through the thin lenses of her glasses with a very concentrated gaze, she froze, amazed by what she saw, not believing her own eyes because of the incredible size of the target. The narrative went on to emphasize that the creature was so massive and deadly that it would take the entire national army to destroy it, and that its 9th danger rating was frighteningly rare. Rione was puzzled how such a creature could appear right in the middle of the city, and almost simultaneously, Cross sharply warned that the situation was extremely bad and there was no time to think. Ludmila clenched her fist and shouted that this creature would destroy all possible candidates for future husbands, while Telemea watched the events with alarm, not taking her eyes off the unfolding chaos. He coughed, looking out at the city through the hole in the wall, and with caustic sarcasm called all potential contenders hopeless fools, as if trying to hide his own tension. Afterwards, Crows and Rione fell from above as a massive wave of dark ice magic exploded near the castle, and the villagers below screamed and scattered in panic. Cross rolled back through the rubble, shouting questions in utter confusion as those around him watched the aftermath of the explosion, the street filled with dust and flying rocks. Finally, someone sharply criticized Ludmila, pointing out that she had only frozen the body, leaving the neck untouched, insisting that her ice magic was capable of more, and such a spell would not touch the very core of the monster. Two figures hovered above the Hydra, whose body resisted the magic. One of them explained that only the outer layer could be frozen, but immediately warned that a more powerful spell would pose a threat to the civilians below. The bespectacled girl then sternly admonished Rione, advising her not to get too cocky, as the creature's venom was deadly. She calmly replied that she was well aware of this, while her dark-haired companion gripped her staff tighter, preparing to continue the fight. Then Telemea raised her hand and noted doubtfully that she was unsure whether her debilitating abilities would work against an opponent with excessive regeneration, and there was a rare note of caution in her voice. Afterward, she admitted that she found it extremely uncomfortable to act remotely in such a situation. Off-camera, a quick agreement followed, confirming that such conditions are considered among the most challenging. Ludmila, after a brief pause, admitted she didn't like the plan, but she saw no other way out. Rione responded without hesitation and cheerfully, expressing confidence in the outcome. Then, with a focused expression, Telemea activated a skill specifically designed for fighting hydras. Crows, watching from afar, noted to himself that the chosen strategy seemed logical and well thought out. Soon, Rione delivered a precise blow with her staff, causing the monster to howl in pain. She immediately urged it to keep up the pressure until the enemy was broken. Meanwhile, Sariella ran into the building, thinking as she went that with these three, eliminating a Class 9 enemy shouldn't be an impossible task. Given their caution and desire to limit damage to the townspeople, the situation seemed less critical. Pausing for a moment, she decided with a collected and determined expression that it was necessary to support the others and focus first on containing the spread of destruction. After this, Sariella urgently contacted the dean and reported the catastrophic situation. She insisted that all faculty and staff be assembled immediately to coordinate action against the monster. Before the situation had even stabilized, she reported yet another alarming piece of news. More than 4,000 monsters of an unknown danger class were rapidly moving from the Forest Abyss Sea, indicating a nascent monster influx. Covered in sweat and consumed by rage, Sariella began to doubt the observer's morning report. The coincidence of the sudden invasion with the Hydra's appearance struck her as absurd and out of the ordinary. At that moment, one of the men gave clear orders to the dean. All adventurers of B-class and above were to be immediately pulled to the northern part of the city, and fighters of lower rank were to be sent to evacuate civilians. Meanwhile, one of the combatants angrily declared that she would attack with all 4 basic attributes at once, calling the enemy an insolent scum who deserved no mercy. Sariella noticed the core had appeared in an unusual location and pointed it out loud. Cross silently noted that this posed a problem, as he'd expected to see it closer to his neck. Rione explained anxiously that she had to hold her position, distracting the Hydra's neck, or the plan would fall apart. Meanwhile, Telemea's movement within the frozen body threatened to shatter the ice and upset the balance. Everyone's thoughts converged on one thing. Despite the presence of forces, no one could afford a risky attack on the invisible core, since a mistake would cost too much. Then Rione urgently shouted out the order to strike the core with her sword. The command was immediately carried out below, and Ludmila breathed a sigh of relief, noting that the problem had been solved, at least temporarily. The next moment, Telemaya paled in realization and realized in horror that the poison slime hydra was preparing to unleash a high-level roar that could turn the tide of the battle. Cross sharply warned that panic would kill the wounded, while Rione tensely asked how else they could help. At that moment, the sound of rapid footsteps was heard. Someone had already broken away, rushing to carry out the new order. Rione anxiously asked if this was a joke, suddenly recognizing the figure that appeared as Brave. Kroos admitted he couldn't deny her monstrous strength, nor the royal crest on her exquisite armor, which clearly indicated her origin. Meanwhile, Kroos broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that in a similar situation, Sariella would surely have sent reinforcements. The thought of a child caught in the middle of this nightmare hit him especially hard. Then Telemaya winced in pain, feeling all her strength suddenly vanish without a trace. Rione, also breathing heavily, said bitterly that all their efforts could have been in vain. After that, Kroos stumbled on the cobblestones, barely keeping his footing. From above, Telemaya looked down and thought that perhaps it was time to break the rules and resort to brute force. At that very moment, Rione screamed in horror as she saw Kroos rushing toward the tentacled monster. At the same time, a thought flashed through her mind. Were there any other vulnerable parts of the creature that could be attacked? Kroos, clutching his sword and shouting in shock, found himself in a truly critical situation. The three others watched him with tense and worried expressions, unable to intervene immediately. The next moment, status panels popped up around Kroos, showing zeros on all counts. Off-screen, someone let out a breath of disbelief, wondering who this kid even was. Sariella immediately noticed the empty indicators and sharply warned that in this state, he would die in a matter of moments. Almost simultaneously, she ordered that the fragile core of the slime hydra be protected at all costs. Despite this, Kroos, with a desperate fury in his gaze, gripped his sword tighter and rushed towards the shining portal, deciding that this was their last chance to finish off the hydra without casualties. Then he found himself upside down next to a spinning, dark portal from which writhing tendrils extended. A figure cautiously approached the stairs among the ruins, assessing the scene. Mustering the last of his willpower, Kroos tried to overcome the pain and mentally forced himself to seek help, even though his body reacted painfully to every roar. Meanwhile, two figures, entangled in tentacles, hung above the round stone platform. Rione found herself bound by dark tendrils, but they began to melt and crack, gradually collapsing under her resistance and unable to withstand the pressure. Almost immediately, Kroos desperately called out to Telemaya, demanding that she use restoration. She landed hard on the ground and immediately prepared to act. Sariella then shouted at the wounded man to hold on, explaining that the tentacles had been partially frozen, preventing the poison from spreading. Meanwhile, Rione supported him, pressing her palm against his, a soft glow emanating from it. Rione hastily added that as long as they were alive, she could heal any wound, and urged them not to lose consciousness. Kroos nodded tensely, concentrating on each breath. Telemaya, visibly surprised, asked if the hero was all right. Rione turned sharply, the concern evoked by this question clearly visible in her gaze. Then Rione asked if the armored woman was an escort. She denied it, and Kroos, lying bleeding, thanked them for making it in time. Falling exhausted, Rione acknowledged her own carelessness. Telemaya and another figure watched him closely, sensing the situation teetering on the brink. At that moment, she thought about how, even though he was a level 0 and not a companion of the hero, that man risked his life as if it cost him nothing. Finally, Ludmila wearily admitted that she herself was burned out to the limit and, sighing heavily, called her interlocutor a madman, as if this was the only explanation for everything she had seen. She wondered why she'd even decided to teach this child. A mixture of surprise and determination mingled within her, as if the choice had been made not by reason, but by something deeper. At that moment, Sariella confidently declared that they had finally found the right person. Rione watched with focused determination, while Telemaya remained behind, watching silently and attentively. Then the image of a glowing figure appeared before their eyes, gradually dissolving. Someone thought with disgust that a man without talent, if things continued like this, would simply vanish without a trace. Afterwards, Kroos came to in an unfamiliar room, barely recognizing where he was. Rione sat next to him and calmly asked if he had finally woken up. He jerked in surprise and tensed when Telemaya leaned closer with a confident smile, saying that she had been very worried because it had taken him so long to regain consciousness. Then, somewhat sheepishly, Rione introduced herself as an S-class adventurer from Dragonia. The dark-haired boy's eyes widened, while the long-haired woman simply nodded calmly, accepting it as fact. Telemaya immediately joined the conversation animatedly, explaining that the Dragonians were superior to the Dragonoids, considered the best close combat fighters and among the 3 strongest races, and that there were only 9 S-class adventurers in the entire world. After that, she asked him to calm down and promised to tell her everything from the beginning. In response, he nervously asked why such a person would even need him and where they were now. Then they explained to him that this house had served as their base in Baskrubia, but due to the many wounded who filled the church, they had to move it here. Sitting on his bed, Cross anxiously concluded that there had been many casualties. Ryon immediately assured him in a calm voice that casualties among the residents were almost 0. The dark creature then explained that the destruction from the Hydra had hit the reconstruction zone, which, fortunately, was almost empty due to the festival. Kroos wondered why there were so many wounded, and Riona explained that a large-scale demon invasion had engulfed many B-class fighters, while Sariella sharply emphasized that it was a matter of life and death. Afterwards, a young man was shown lying in bed, while a blonde woman assured him that his few injuries were the result of his brave actions, and life was gradually returning to normal in the adventurer's hideout. Rione added that most people don't remember his exploits because of the roar effect, but she personally believes he has a lot to be proud of. Kroos, still sitting on the bed, thought with despair that without Ryon and the others, he simply would not have survived, and this realization weighed more heavily than any pain. He lowered his head and Telemia gently stroked his hair, saying that what he had done was important, even if all his indicators were 0. A girl nearby, nervously biting her finger, quietly agreed, and the guy noted with irritation that now it was becoming awkward to admit it, while the other companion looked at them with obvious incomprehension. Then Cross sat up straight on the bed and Telemea, sitting down next to him, insistently demanded that he agree to become her student, leaving no room for refusal. She immediately added that she had heard from Sariella about his expulsion and assumed that he essentially had nowhere to return to. Finally, Kroos looked at her in surprise, and Telemaya, blushing and noticeably embarrassed, hastily and almost pleadingly invited him to stay with her. Riona, sweating, recalled with internal shock how she had once been expelled from school for complete failure. The memory struck her deeply, and for a moment she doubted whether she truly deserved to be called an S-class adventurer's student. Meanwhile, the boy, with growing agitation, decided that the sudden appearance of this beautiful woman was nothing more than a dream after his death by the Hydra. She, on the other hand, calmly looked away, as if the events were completely unaffected. After this, Ludmila turned reproachfully to Riona, claiming she should have immediately reported his awakening. In response, she merely smirked smugly and retorted that her cunning attempt to gain an advantage had been underestimated. Then Rion reacted sharply, admitting that she'd been found out after all. Behind her, Kroos lay on the floor, and both looked equally stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Then, with a confident air, Telemaya introduced herself as a high elf and an archmage, declaring that becoming her apprentice was the best possible option. The boy listened with obvious intent as she praised his hidden potential, especially his ability to strike at his weak points. Then Telemia suddenly went on the offensive, challenging her opponent, who responded by threatening to turn them both to ashes. Cross found himself between them, barely coping with the pressure and sweating profusely from the effort. At that very moment, a powerful earthquake shook the city, causing a wave of panic among the residents. Someone shouted that this could be more dangerous than the Hydra itself, while another admitted he didn't understand what was happening, but clearly sensed the impending threat. Amid the chaos, Kroos unexpectedly offered to become an apprentice to all 3 of them. The girl behind him stood ready, while the other 2 watched intently, surprised and focused. Then he hesitantly suggested raising the perfect man with them. Ryon and another companion exchanged glances, deciding that the last one to harvest would win, and they began to ponder the idea of creating the strongest possible. Telemia deemed the terms fair and immediately confirmed his status as a student. Ryon nodded in agreement, considering the consequences, while the boy himself reacted with a mixture of surprise and timid doubt. Cross, his eyes wide, couldn't believe he was actually going to become the apprentice of 3 S-rank adventurers. His thoughts were jumbled and his nervous excitement made it difficult to concentrate. Finally, he loudly stated his name and age, emphasizing that he was 14 years old, human, and unemployed. The trio listened with varying expressions. Some glances betrayed curiosity, others a cold assessment. Then he was given a condition: he couldn't fall in love until he was strong enough to overcome all 3 of them together. He didn't yet understand this meaning, while one of the girls promised to try her best and asked for care, while the other admitted she lacked talent and didn't live up to expectations. Later, Kroos stood by the sink, contemplating his fate. He'd been expelled from adventurer school, abandoned the orphanage, and then somehow become a student in 3 S classes, only to face a new challenge the very next day. After that, he announced that he would begin training first. The other two immediately began arguing, each insisting on their right to begin, demonstrating zeal and determination. Soon, Kroos became wary, gripping his sword in a defensive stance when a status screen appeared before him. It read, "A 14-year-old man with no class, skills, or abilities with 0 stats in all parameters." Then Rion noticed someone approaching and greeted the guest. Kroos, struck by the appearance of the mansion, was asked if everything was alright and quickly replied that he was simply impressed. Afterwards, they discussed how they had managed to acquire the mansion under the guise of a training base. Its convenient location outside the city and the financial resources of the three mentors were frankly surprising. Meanwhile, Sariala sternly asked Tilamea why she was there, reminding her that she should have been the one training Kroos first. She replied with a smile that she was simply keeping an eye on Rion to ensure she didn't overstep her bounds, causing the boy to flare up indignantly. In conclusion, Kroos, with noticeable excitement, agreed to serve, while Rion, already with a sword in her hand, cast aside her previous reproaches and resolutely demanded that training begin immediately. Telemaya gently cooled his ardor, asking him not to overheat prematurely, and casually hinted that she had a secret Dragonian technique for accelerated growth up her sleeve if things didn't go according to plan. Hearing this, the other man involuntarily froze in surprise. Kroos reacted with surprise, explaining that the city's residents, of course, would have been ready to chase them to the ends of the earth. But formally, one could always say that they had merely turned the situation to their advantage. He then looked dubiously at Telemea, who, with a carefree smile, declared that using the Dark Chalice as a sealed relic was perfectly acceptable, provided he managed to regain his strength before the secret was revealed. The boy couldn't tell whether this was a joke or not. After a brief pause, Kroos agreed to begin with the first task. The two women stood confidently, one laughing loudly, the other leaning forward, and he couldn't tell if this was part of the plan or just a joke. Then he charged, throwing his sword into the attack, but Telemaya calmly took the blow without moving. Rion watched from beneath a tree, loudly encouraging him, keeping him on track. She then pointed out directly that he had been suppressed and humiliated too often up to this point. Kroos tensed in surprise, gripping his sword tighter, as if preparing to defend himself not only with his body, but also with his words. Afterwards, Sariella explained in a calm tone that, at the school for future adventurers, such things happen to the weak. Hearing this, he was simply at a loss, unsure how to react. Then Rion calmly noticed that the thrust of his sword had long since weakened and become sluggish. Kroos responded sharply, shocked that she had even noticed it. He listened with bated breath as they explained to him that the root of the problem was the constant talk of his own weakness. This had been hammered into his head and body from the very beginning, especially on that tense first day. Telemaya immediately pointed this out directly, saying that he reminded her of a man who anticipates a counterattack and is afraid of it, which is why he slows down his attack every time. Kroos looked focused, but panic was rising inside. At that moment, someone's voice noted that fear had already permeated even his blade, and the training paused for a moment. A mocking conversation between two boys came to mind, mocking the fact that someone had lost a strength competition to a 9-year-old girl, adding that at 14, without training, you should already be at least level 5. Against this backdrop, Kroos despaired that he needed at least some kind of class or at least one skill. Then he thought he would understand which direction to take. A crowded arena appeared before his mind's eye, where a dark-haired guy stood amidst the whispers of the crowd, discussing the man with the worst class, who could neither learn skills nor level up. Then Sariella sternly cut him off, forbidding him to say such a thing, while he desperately begged not to be expelled, addressing her as Madam Dean. She coldly warned that the path of an adventurer without a class was tantamount to suicide, and that even training would hardly be able to change anything. Kroos froze in shock when he was firmly made to understand that the decision to exile him would not be reversed and that he should consider another fate, one not connected with adventures. He remembered the dean saying in the hallway that without a class he couldn't become an adventurer. Those words echoed in his head as she approached, and he tried to process what he'd heard. Returning to the present, Telemea calmly said that he had a good foundation, but it was being eaten away by atrophy. The lack of results creates a vicious cycle that only deepens the failure with each passing moment. Finally, she tossed her sword aside and declared that if one feared close combat, training with her would be fruitless. She then outlined the first goal, learning to enjoy fighting with others, rather than cowering in fear before it. Kroos asked with obvious hesitation if he was really expected to enjoy the fight. In response, Rion calmly reminded him how he had rushed the Hydra without hesitation and advised him to get used to striking with full force without holding back. He then straightened up abruptly when Telemaya confidently declared that this was the first stage of training. She immediately challenged him to attack her with his sword without any restrictions, as if testing his resolve. Kroos nervously clutched his weapon and retorted that pain was inevitable, no matter the outcome. Telemaya, without changing her expression, remarked that minor wounds were easily healed with potions and weren't worth such hesitation. Then Rion advised Telemay to lower his guard, explaining that otherwise he simply wouldn't be able to strike without injuring his hand. She silently raised her palm, indicating her agreement. Cross began to make excuses with alarm, denying any misunderstanding, but Telemaya, surrounded by a light aura, asked with playful curiosity if he was afraid of harming her. Then they showed a building where, in a blur of speech bubbles, someone was laughing, calling another a good but naive guy. Then the girl called out to Ludmila, who appeared with a confident smile, while the stunned young man watched from the sidelines. Soon, Sariella asked what was going on, but Telemaya, busy preparing, ordered her to fire immediately. She then demonstrated an advanced earth magic known as Stone's Edge. The next moment, Kroos, sword in hand and a mixture of terror and rage in his eyes, found himself at the epicenter of the explosion. Rion calmly observed the situation, while another figure watched from the doorway. He screamed out Rion's name through the dust and debris, his weapon still in his hands as chaos unfolded around him. Meanwhile, the girl with the small horns rushed to reassure the frightened boy, explaining that the house was soundproofed and the noise wouldn't disturb anyone. He nervously asked how such a thing could even be considered normal. Cross, overcome with fear and anger, vehemently denied what was happening, while behind him the huge wall cracked and began to crumble. Then Telemaya, with a broad smile, assured her that in this situation there was no need to worry about her safety, standing confidently among the stones and clouds of smoke. Kroos looked at her in complete shock, as she demonstrated the blades and claimed that she could be cut with a real sword. Without fear of consequences, she would still remain the same. He chuckled nervously and admitted that he was genuinely afraid of harming her. In response, she calmly explained that striking an unarmed woman of much higher rank in a one-sided duel would quickly break his habit of hesitation. After that, the real training began. Cross attacked furiously and Telemaya encouraged him, demanding that he keep the rhythm, aim for the throat, and activate his internal kill mode, while Rione watched from the side. Out of breath, Kroos snapped and rudely told someone to shut up, calling them an idiot. One of the girls laughed in response, teasingly commenting on how Rion sounded like a pervert. Then he froze in amazement as he saw Telemaya performing a ritual of willpower and endurance transfer under a tree. Her palms glowed with energy, her entire attention focused on the process. Rion gently reminded him that training should be fun, then handed him water and food to help him regain his strength. Kroos accepted the offer, awkwardly but gratefully. They soon decided to call it a day. Someone reminded them that they needed to get plenty of rest at night to allow their bodies time to recover. Later, Kroos immersed himself in a spacious bath with a dragon-shaped fountain. The warm water washed away his tension, and he quietly expressed his gratitude for being allowed to use this place. Kroos froze, seeing the table laden with food, and was at a loss for words. Telemaya calmly noted that after the grueling workouts, his body needed replenishment and took charge of his nutrition, insisting that he eat properly. Then Rion firmly announced that her part of the training was now beginning. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving him slightly confused as he watched her go, trying to figure out what would happen next. A moment later, the confident woman returned with brief instructions to prepare for the lesson. Kroos froze in surprise, not immediately grasping the meaning of the request, and so he hesitated to clarify the details. Rion, noticing his reaction, quickly and clearly explained that this was a practical exercise. She asked him to remove his outerwear and lie down, emphasizing that no extra steps were required and there was nothing to worry about. Kroos flushed with embarrassment and nodded awkwardly. Ludmila watched attentively and, noticing his tension, tried to diffuse the situation by briefly explaining why all this was necessary. Afterwards, Ludmila applied the healing mixture and calmly explained that the procedure helps restore stamina and improve mana circulation. Kroos listened, trying to concentrate, though surprise still etched on his face. She then went on to explain. Characters without a class, she explained, may not level up in the usual way, but they can master skills in various areas, becoming versatile with sufficient effort, albeit with slow progress. Continuing, Ludmila added that the sensation of magical flow, familiar to her and Rion, can be practiced daily. This approach gradually facilitates the acquisition of skills, even for those who formally remain without a class. Meanwhile, Telemaya, smiling slightly, noted that regular practice together and simply being there strengthens trust and concentration. With systematic practice, this is sure to yield results. Kroos quietly thanked him for his concern. Ludmila, now calmer, advised him not to stay up too late and to go to bed on time, reminding him that morning would come quickly and training would continue. Later, he walked down the hallway and reflected on how unusual and intense the day had been. The thought of daily classes with such mentors was both inspiring and terrifying. In the spacious room, he stretched out on a large canopy bed. The soft rustling of stuffed animals nearby reminded him that it was safe and peaceful here. Lying in bed, Cross remembered the advice to go to bed early and decided to follow it. A cheerful voice came from the hallway praising him for his work, which cheered him up a bit. Suddenly, someone leaned closer and gently covered his mouth with a hand so he wouldn't be startled by the surprise. He flinched and then heard a quiet apology for the abruptness. A warm smile followed, making it clear this was all just a sign of approval for their efforts. Cross, confused, asked what was going on, trying to comprehend the situation. They calmly explained to him that this was a restorative practice and energy control. It was important to remain still and follow the instructions for the process to proceed properly. Somewhere nearby, a muffled reminder was given that increasing her overall mana reserves aids skill acquisition and supports Ludmila's magical development plan. They advised her to relax and let her body recover. At this point, Telemaya, noticing the lack of coordination, intervened sharply, declaring that she sensed something was wrong and demanded an explanation so that everything would go strictly according to plan. She immediately clarified that only safe energy dissipation methods were used. Rion countered that minimal contact and precise dosing are sometimes sufficient for such tasks. At the end, Kroos lay on his bed, slightly dizzy, reflecting on the eventful day. The idea of CD teamwork and shared responsibility seemed daunting, but he decided to accept the rules and move forward without further ado. Cross looked tense and wary, unsure whether it was acceptable for his training to proceed so calmly, given all the circumstances. A strange feeling lingered within him, as if he were missing something important. Telemaya, hearing his doubts, asked with genuine surprise whether he really expected only harsh and exhausting methods from the participation of S-class adventurers, as if this was the only possible path. The horned girl smiled confidently and explained that pressure and severity alone don't make people stronger. The dark-haired boy listened carefully, trying to grasp the meaning of what was said and not miss any details. Telemaya added with a determined expression that a mentor who breaks a student without taking his capabilities into account is a mediocre person and a bad teacher, no matter how strong he is. Afterward, she acknowledged that there are indeed moments in life when difficult trials are unavoidable. However, daily discipline, which allows one to understand one's own limits and learn to manage them, is far more important. Kroos, clutching his sword, remarked that despite the beginning of his journey, there was no need to rush now. A calm voice responded by reminding him that his classless status had been known for a long time and that the mentor's job was simply to make him strong. After about 3 days of training, a confident woman praised the pace of the workout. Outside the large building, under an overcast sky, the others responded enthusiastically, sensing noticeable progress. Cross, sweating in surprise, suddenly realized his body had become unusually light. He noted with bewilderment that he felt almost no pain, trying to figure out what was happening to him. Rion calmly described the sensations of using magic. Kroos, intrigued and wary, wondered if he could combine this sensation with the movement of the sword to strengthen the blow. After this, Rion, with noticeable enthusiasm, asked to see the status plate. He nervously agreed, and the girl standing next to him leaned forward curiously. The status sheet was carefully examined. It listed the name Kroos a la carte, 14 years old, human, with 0 stats but with the skills Strength Compensation and Clear Slash, level 1. Kroos' eyes widened and he trembled, realizing that what he'd seen wasn't a mistake, but genuine skill. Rion, Telemaya, and another figure watched his reaction closely, their interest evident. Telemaya immediately and joyfully congratulated him on his first mastered skill, explaining that it strengthens the blade's magical content and makes his blows noticeably more powerful. Nearby, 2 girls exchanged excited comments. One expressed her joy with an almost childish gesture, while the other confidently confirmed that the shot had been perfect. Someone noted with genuine surprise that he had developed 3 passive parameter compensation skills at once, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. Kroos listened attentively as Rion explained that his stats, which usually remained at 0, had now noticeably increased. The third figure silently observed the conversation, assessing what was happening. 2 women discussed the unemployed person's class. One wondered whether he could eventually master all the compensatory skills, while the other explained that this class allows one to acquire basic skills in any field. Kroos made a strangled sound, feeling the tension in his body as the 2 women, one smiling, the other looking confident, discussed how hard it was to start from scratch and how everything was going exactly according to plan. Despite the throbbing pain in his cheek, he suddenly smiled, feeling a new lightness and speed as he gripped the sword. It became clear this wasn't just his imagination. Gritting his teeth, Kroos thought about the fact that even if the status plate still showed zeros, an increase of even 5 units meant more to him than any loud numbers for others. Telemea laughed confidently and without a hint of tension, while the armored figure awkwardly thanked Rion and the others for their assistance, still not fully comprehending the changes that had taken place. Afterwards, Rion warmly praised Kroos for mastering 4 skills so quickly, noting that the foundation for this had been laid by his persistence even before the training began. She lightly touched his head and took his hand against the stone wall, trying to instill confidence. Then she smiled even more softly and calmly said that even though they were strong, he too deserved to be considered worthy. Kroos looked tense, but her words conveyed genuine support. Meanwhile, Telemaya, standing with her back to her, warned Sariella that in a real fight she'd have to rely on her compensatory skills. Sariella shielded her eye and admitted that, in terms of raw physical abilities, she was indeed inferior to many. Rione then confidently suggested that Kroos remember everything she'd said and try his hand at a real battle. He nervously asked if this meant fighting a real monster and received a calm reply that he would be matched against an opponent. Kroos sheepishly admitted that he had never been able to defeat even a horned rabbit before, shielding himself from the bright flash of light that illuminated the area around him. He visibly panicked, not understanding how to cope with such a test, but Telemaya, with an encouraging smile, explained that confidence only comes when you actually defeat your enemies. Kroos reluctantly admitted that even with the new skill, he was still only at level 1. In response, they calmly made it clear that this was normal and shouldn't be a cause for concern. He began to internally admit that the horned rabbit was now within his grasp. The girl next to him also convinced herself that Riona could be trusted, and then noticed that someone had returned. Sariella reported that a particularly active specimen had been spotted nearby, at the entrance to the Forest of the Abyss. Kroos looked up and saw large, snake-like creatures surrounding her, arousing her uneasy curiosity. At the sight of the snake with Type 2 eyes, his face contorted with fear and rage. He remembered that this creature was considered a level 1 risk, even though it was considered a lower class. Kroos despairingly admitted that he might have been able to handle the rabbit, but his current opponent seemed hopeless. Telemaya immediately challenged him, declaring that at this point he had to be able to handle something like that. A huge, multi-eyed snake appeared before him, and Kroos gritted his teeth, remembering the promise that the training wouldn't be too harsh. Fear and anger mingled in a single emotion. Clutching his sword and finding himself surrounded by the monster, he insisted the risk was too great. Rion confidently countered, making it clear he was now capable of withstanding the ordeal. His head was spinning, his consciousness was swimming, and Kroos had a hard time staying in reality, feeling his attention begin to slip away. Suddenly, a giant, multi-eyed snake closed around him, making it impossible for him to escape. Kroos screamed in terror and rage, feeling the pressure constricting his body. He panicked and asked for confirmation that everything was under control. Rion warned him that the creature's eyes were located all over their bodies to disorient their victims, and reminded him that they were much stronger than they appeared. Through the pain, Kroos wondered what to do next, and then with a sharp cry he went on the attack, forcing himself to act despite his fear. He unleashed a series of rapid strikes on the multi-eyed creature, frantically analyzing its movements, speed, and possible weaknesses, while the enemy clearly did not expect such an onslaught. Sweat pouring down his eyes, Kroos mentally ordered himself to act now, gripping his sword tightly. Rion watched from the side with a confident smirk, realizing he had already begun to plot a counterattack, turning counterclockwise. Kroos was breathing heavily, leaning on his sword and dropping to one knee, while behind him 2 girls were genuinely happy and encouraging him, not hiding their delight at the result they saw. Rion then calmly explained that the enemy possessed impressive strength, but acted in a formulaic manner, and his weaknesses and techniques were predictable. Kroos chuckled awkwardly, hearing that it had been an excellent combat test for a first attempt. After that, the gaze slid to a large building under a cloudy sky, and someone remembered the moment when all the learned skills first appeared on the status plate, as if confirming the path taken. Ludmila suddenly stopped and admitted she'd gotten too carried away thinking out loud. They immediately reassured her, letting her know they understood her anxiety perfectly well and shared the joy of her progress. A little later, Kroos looked in surprise at the steaming cup offered to him. He was told that this moment was worth celebrating and that he could now drink it before his recovery procedures. He cautiously inquired about what was inside and was told that it was medicinal wine that would help increase one's magical level and enhance compensatory skills. Rion then added that the drink was made using a special recipe, culled from the secret potions of 11 human kingdoms. She confidently declared that it would help him become a man worthy of her expectations, which visibly embarrassed him. Meanwhile, Ludmila vigorously encouraged everyone to continue practicing clean cut, focusing on each strike, and pushed everyone to move forward without stopping. Kroos, still recalling the fight, reminded them how important it was to maintain the feeling of victory over the many-eyed snake and to combine magic with movement. There was a cheerful agreement in response. He wiped the sweat from his brow and, smiling, noted that he'd been looking noticeably more confident lately. The two women next to him exchanged glances and admitted it was probably due to his victory over the creature, and they were pleased with their growth. Later, Kroos and Telemaya discussed how a lack of confidence is often more dangerous than overconfidence. He recalled how, back in the orphanage, his peers often made fun of him. Sariella calmly explained that the orphanage's leader, a girl named Giselle, possessed a rare talent and the class of Destructive Warrior Apprentice, and already possessed 10 starting skills. Hearing this, one of the girls was genuinely surprised. Then the idea was voiced that with such data one could eventually reach rank A, and this does not at all seem unattainable. Telemaya, covering her face with her hand, noticed that now it became clear why he was so shy, if there were always mockers like the one standing nearby around him. Kroos gripped his sword tighter and thought the past was behind him. He realized clearly if he continued to grow at this rate, confidence would come naturally. After this, Telemaya insistently suggested a sparring match without restraint, promising that there was no need to worry about their magic reserves. Kroos enthusiastically accepted the challenge. She teased him with a slight grin, reminding him that he still had no class, despite his rapid rise to level 3 in just 3 days. Rion watched with a warm smile. Telemaya then enthusiastically suggested setting truly inspiring goals, demonstrating determination and infecting others with her energy. Rion supported the idea and suggested that Kroos name a monster he'd like to defeat or an opponent he'd like to surpass, promising no one would laugh. He hesitated, not immediately finding an answer. At the end, Kroos quietly admitted that attending an adventurer's school had always been his dream. He watched as two confident girls discussed how strange it was to be chosen by prominent people and suddenly live in luxurious surroundings to which he was still only just getting used. 4 years ago, a little boy witnessed a swarm of monsters descend upon his village. He froze in place, unable to move, when one of the terrifying creatures reached out a paw toward him, and in that moment, the world seemed to stop. Kroos still remembered that moment with shock, especially the way the heroine named Elysia appeared like a whirlwind and single-handedly repelled the threat, saving the villagers. That image was forever etched in his memory. He explained that it was then that the desire to become an adventurer, capable of protecting people just like her, was born in him. That's why he enrolled in adventurer school, while the two girls across from him listened attentively and without interruption. Telemaya thoughtfully inquired if it was because of this memory that he had decided to attack Hydra. Kroos immediately became alarmed and began denying it, claiming he wasn't that reckless and could never approach the level of that heroine. After this, Sariella asked Rion what they should do next, noting that the school, with the exception of the hero, was almost entirely filled with girls, which added a strange tone to the situation. Ludmila sharply rejected the request, calling it disrespectful. Rion raised her eyebrows in surprise, and another figure's eyes widened in surprise. Telemaya calmly explained to Kroos that merely training with them would lead to distorted habits. She emphasized the importance of encountering different people and reminded him that to regain his adventurer status, he needed to pass a recovery test. Kroos raised his hands enthusiastically and asked Rion to wait, while Telemaya insisted that the student's little dream was worth fulfilling. Rion, meanwhile, remained calm, crossing her arms and observing the argument. At that moment, Sariella announced she had a good idea. Hearing this, Telemaya visibly tensed and reacted with surprise, as if expecting a trick. Then Sariella told Kroos that, since the decision had been made, he would have to learn one more additional skill. He was surprised but immediately focused, ready to listen further. Telemaya grinned widely and announced that they had a secret remedy that would be the decisive trump card in the recovery exam. 20 days later, they stood in front of a large building. Someone noticed that Kroos had suddenly gone silent, and he admitted that now that the moment had arrived, he was starting to get nervous. Kroos straightened with determination, and Telemaya confidently declared that learning to enjoy tension was a sign of maturity. Rion watched from behind them, not interfering. Telemaya laughed and declared that they wouldn't be able to pass the exam the usual way. Rion silently accepted this, while Kroos, in the background, jumped with excitement, barely containing his energy. Soon he was alone in front of a closed door. Kroos quietly calmed himself, recalling the skills and techniques Rion and the others had taught him during their special training. Suddenly, several people reacted loudly to someone's appearance, shouting questions and suggesting that the recommendation to drop out of school had driven this person crazy. Kroos, covered in sweat, realized that the recovery exam was supposed to be held in public, but what was happening was clearly not going according to plan and was causing alarm. Rion flared with rage and bewilderment, demanding to know how someone with no class could show up for the exam just a month after being expelled and even choose her as his opponent. Telemaya, with a sly smile, noted that unexpected situations are inevitable for an adventurer. She called it a chance to regain lost confidence, and those around her listened attentively. At that moment, Ludmilla stepped forward with a raised knife and angrily threatened Cross, declaring that she would discourage him from ever again talking about the adventurer's path. He instinctively assumed a defensive stance, stunned by the abruptness of the situation. She sharply ordered Cross to hurry up and get out of sight, declaring that he was only disturbing the training and should not be there for a second longer. Rion then proceeded to knock Cross down without hesitation, coldly telling him he was useless and would never become an adventurer. She added sarcastically that perhaps he should beg the monsters for mercy if he was going to survive it all. Cross turned away angrily, declaring he didn't even want to look in anyone's direction. At that moment, an announcement was made that the recovery exam would be conducted in a dual format. The herald loudly announced the candidate for reinstatement, Cross Alucard and his opponent Giselle String, inviting them to come forward. Cross and one of the girls watched tensely from the sidelines, feeling the air thicken. Sariella turned sharply on Riona, demanding an explanation for her methods and pointing out her overly rough, almost boyish demeanor. In response, Riona brazenly asked what kind of man Sariella expected to raise. Rion concluded with grim determination that it was all over and, assessing what was happening, she thought that Cross must already be squeezed to the limit and effectively broken. Sariella, looking down with a serious expression, silently noted to herself that exactly a month had passed since the class assignments, and this fact was much more significant than it seemed to those around her. Someone worriedly asked if the boy was all right, but Sariella sharply rebuked them, accusing them of pitting a remarkable man against a lackluster fighter. Telemaya watched nearby with a slight grin. Ludmilla stepped forward and mockingly pointed out to Cross that he was relying too much on defensive skills during the exam, activating them impulsively. He looked stunned, not immediately grasping the meaning of these words. Meanwhile, Rion activated her physical enhancement and warned that the enemy would not be able to withstand her if she took things seriously. Her stance betrayed a steely determination to see the matter through. Cross barely blocked the sharp, twisting attack from his armored opponent. His face was a mixture of fear and stubbornness, but he held his ground. At that moment, he realized with surprise that he was far less frightened than he had expected. This realization flashed quickly, but it gave him stability. Rioni clenched her fist tightly, noticing that the previous blow had been weaker than she had expected, and this caused irritation. As the fight continued, Telemaya calmly suggested to Cross that it was better to frequently turn his agility skills on and off, rather than constantly moving at maximum speed, as chaotic acceleration only interfered with control. Rion shouted that this was the limit and rushed forward with a powerful attack. Cross, pinned to the ground, braced himself for the blow, gripping the weapon until his palms ached. However, the next moment, Rion froze in shock, not understanding how the enemy had manifested an attack skill and why his movements contradicted the indicators with zero stats. Sariella reacted with annoyed surprise, calling the whole thing a serious miscalculation. Telemaya, on the other hand, laughed, and the crowd murmured, wondering how Giselle was even defending herself against Cross with a 0 point. Cross, clutching his wooden sword tightly, thought that if things continued like this, he wouldn't be able to win. He was acutely aware of Giselle's strength, and that even hitting her wouldn't give him a decisive advantage. Telemaya calmly explained that the X skill is a powerful technique born from the combination of several different abilities. She emphasized that without sufficient firepower, it's impossible to turn the tide of battle, no matter how different the parameters. Rione confidently declared that she had just the right skill. Cross, sweating and tense to the limit, realized that when used correctly, such a technique almost always succeeds and becomes more powerful the more dangerous the opponent. Rione gripped her sword tightly and sternly warned Cross not to get carried away and lose his head. In the heat of battle, she said, it's the 0 points and self-control that decide the outcome, not blind attack. Cross tensed and froze in surprise when she explained more calmly that the key to the additional skill was courage. Without it, any technique would remain empty movements. Then he pulled himself together and declared that he couldn't allow the enemy's lethal intent to weigh on his reason. He insisted that the decisive step was to meet the blow and seize the initiative, otherwise there would be no victory. With these words, Cross shouted that this skill was made for him, as he had already charged at the Hydra once. Almost immediately, he accelerated sharply and performed the technique Emergency Evasion, Clean Slash. His sword flashed as he moved, and he brought down a powerful blow, shouting the name of his low-ranking extra skill. His opponent was thrown back, crashing through the ruined fence and collapsing behind it. Telemaya watched with a smug grin, Chuckling approvingly, she briefly remarked that these were precisely the moments she enjoyed most. Before Cross could process what had just happened, the announcer's voice loudly announced his successful completion of the recovery exam. Confetti rained down, and the stands erupted in cheers. He exhaled joyfully and began celebrating his return to school, while one of the men confirmed the result. Meanwhile, Ryon sat on the ground, clearly irritated, refusing to accept defeat at the hands of a man without class. Crows, still stunned, worriedly asked if Giselle was okay as she collapsed. Someone in the crowd sharply accused the whole thing of cheating and shouted an insult. The view then opened up to a massive coliseum where speech bubbles echoed with praise for Cross's tenacity and impressive performance, underscoring the significance of his victory. Having recovered, Crow sincerely thanked everyone for their support and for the chance to return to school. Ryon reminded him to take out his status plate, noting that skills usually improve especially quickly after serious battles. He looked closely at the stat sheet, which showed a 14-year-old man with 0 base stats, but with a whole list of compensating skills and enhancements at different levels. Ryon and Telemaya watched as Kroos ran forward full of energy. Ryon quietly remarked that his growth was too rapid, and Telemaya silently agreed. Kroos, looking around, exclaimed in delight that the view seemed unreal. Ryon and Telemaya stood nearby in silence, admiring the majestic city with its towers and mountains on the horizon. Meanwhile, they recalled the conversation they'd had before meeting Cross. Back then, the blonde woman had calmly recounted the existence of a hero in the distant borderlands, revered as a deity and possessing S-class strength, while the man next to them doubted the veracity of those words. Seriella explained that the place declared sacred by the Beastmen was extremely mysterious and had nearly escaped her network of information. Telemaya merely confirmed that it was indeed a remote outskirts. Cross wondered if isolation in such a place could distort a person's character. Then he decided that since he was so revered there must be nothing wrong with this hero's personality. Ludmila, leaning on the table, confidently remarked that many such stories sounded like fiction. Telemaya, with her usual cheerfulness, agreed that even so, it was worth a look. The group soon reached a sacred site, where the tribe insisted on a formal attire for guests. Ryon confidently declared the clothing offered comfortable for movement, while the other girl hesitantly agreed, adjusting her outfit. Rione noted the unusually lively atmosphere around them. Cross found it both unpleasant and exciting, while Telemaya enthusiastically encouraged everyone to move on, and they energetically melted into the place. Telemaya confidently declared that the final test was likely ahead. Ryon supported her, suggesting they go a little further, and their gazes betrayed a sense of concentration before the new challenge. Cross admitted with an awkward grin that he had just been defeated again. Meanwhile, Ryon, Telemaya, and Ludmila stood calmly before the fallen giant creature, with Ryon trying to comprehend what she had seen, while Ludmila dryly remarked that it was definitely not a human being. After that, Kroos waved his hand energetically and shouted that they'd see each other later as he ran away from the large building. A figure with long hair remained nearby, silently watching him disappear from sight. Meanwhile, Ludmila returned to the familiar place, where a man greeted her warmly. She responded simply, as if it were just a normal return home. Seriella soon appeared and announced that she'd checked on Cross while he was running around carefree, though she'd expected to find him training with Ryon. Ryon, upon meeting her, merely nodded calmly. Seriella asked with a touch of irony if he'd run out of conversational skills. Then Telemaya informed him that he'd successfully passed the entrance exam to the Adventurers Academy, much to Ryon's surprise, while Cross himself silently noted how difficult the selection process had been. Afterwards, Seriella laid out a copy of Cross's status plate on the table and asked for feedback. Ryon and another girl leaned closer, examining the data with obvious interest and mild surprise. Ryon suddenly remembered a long-ago incident when someone was teaching elven magic and demanded to know the insane growth rate reflected in the stats. Someone stumbled in response, unable to find the words. Telemaya, hearing this, intervened sharply from afar, demanding to know why the elf had resorted to such a thing. Her voice was tinged with irritation and direct accusation. Ludmila raised her voice and demanded silence, accusing those around her of using Dragonair's secret treasure on Cross. Ryon immediately asked if it was also connected to the church's sealed artifact, and Cross reacted with shock and anger. Ryon objected strongly, declaring that using secret treasures early on was unacceptable, even if the student's growth was slow. She emphasized that such interference would only hinder their development. Telemaya, overcome with anger, declared that she should have been personally involved in his upbringing. Ryon tried to calm her down, and Seriella confidently assured her that they hadn't used any secret relics. Ryone vehemently denied using prohibited items, arguing that the consequences would have been far more drastic. She pointed to the growth figures, using them as evidence against the accusations. After this, everyone wondered if he really hadn't used anything, emphasizing that it was important to hear the opinion of the one who had taken the student under his guidance. Sariella sat down at the table and began explaining that, despite their efforts, the boy's skill development was slower than that of those of noble blood. Rion listened attentively without interrupting. Rion thoughtfully asked if such a pace was truly considered normal for the average person. Someone remarked that it was even a little sad, but Ludmila abruptly interrupted the conversation, pointing out their poor understanding of the topic and calling such rapid growth an anomaly. The scene later shifted to a classroom where the teacher explained that unique skills are usually innate, but in rare cases can awaken after birth. The students listened attentively and took notes. Kroos added that such phenomena are possible due to special objects, magical influences, or extreme conditions, such as near-death situations. The class took his words seriously. In his thoughts, Kroos noted that participating in training matches and absorbing knowledge in class would help him better understand Rion's teachings and apply them in practice. Finally, he thought with an awkward smile that Giselle was probably still angry. Behind her, several people were watching him with tense, disgruntled expressions, foreshadowing difficult days ahead. The armored figure loudly ordered those gathered to find opponents for mock duels and form groups. It was explained that training would be structured around participants of similar classes and abilities to avoid imbalances. Kroos glanced around awkwardly and quietly asked if anyone wanted to partner up with him. One of the boys flinched, apologized as he walked, and quickly walked away, leaving him standing alone while the others chatted animatedly behind. He walked on, arms crossed, wondering if they were avoiding him because of his conflict with Giselle. A sharp pang of discomfort came over him, as if half the reasons for studying here had vanished, and his recent cheerful exhortation to fight many and gain experience came flooding back. At that moment, someone called out to Giselle sharply, reminding her of something that had happened earlier. She turned around with a shocked and hardened expression, as if she'd heard something that had knocked the ground out from under her. Almost immediately, two men hastily warned the girl not to provoke anyone and to leave as quickly as possible. A woman standing nearby asked, confused, what was going on, and another figure tried to say something but hesitated. Meanwhile, Rion discovered a magical object and calmly explained that it was capable of revealing all hidden information without exception. Upon hearing this, one of the women asked in surprise what exactly it was. Rion added that an advanced evaluation skill had been used, allowing them to see even masked data. Ludmila frowned and wondered why such a skill had been used on Kroos specifically and whether someone else was involved. Meanwhile, Kroos examined his status plate, displaying 0 stats and numerous skills. He admitted he didn't understand what was happening, but the strange feeling persisted and grew stronger. It was then decided that this topic could not be discussed lightly. The three gathered around the table, and one of them insistently urged caution and silence, emphasizing that for now, even Kroos himself could not explain anything. Soon, Kroos asked in surprise what the unfamiliar figure was doing there. Rion immediately greeted her confidently, identifying her as the descendant of the brave one, Lady Alicia Lafagalian. The crowd reacted instantly with a mixture of admiration and alarm. Alicia, standing confidently in her armor, was recognized, and whispers broke out around her discussing not only her origins, but also her striking beauty. Kroos and Rione simultaneously froze in shock, their faces flushed and their eyes widened. The confirmation of what they had feared left them speechless, leaving only a stupor. Ludmila noted with noticeable relief that she hadn't heard from any S-class adventurers in a while. She added that she'd recently heard of someone similar who had managed to pass the recovery exam. Kroos clasped his hands nervously as the crowd behind him murmured in surprise and bewilderment. Someone remarked that the heroine looked like she was about to burst into tears, which only heightened the tension. Rion abruptly grabbed the stunned Kroos and led him away. Those remaining watched them go, and one of the witnesses wondered aloud that they had disappeared so suddenly. Then came the introduction. Ludmila was named Alicia Rafalian, the strongest swordsman of her generation at 16, and a direct descendant of a great hero. A boy standing nearby looked at Kroos with shy but sincere admiration. Rion explained that the descendants of heroes often enroll in adventurer schools not only for strength, but also to find worthy companions. Kroos uncomfortably wondered if it was even possible to marry such a beauty, feeling a strange surge of energy as someone urged them to move on. A little later, Rion, with noticeable emotion, thanked them for their help, admitting that this was not the first time she had been saved and that this gratitude extended far beyond today. Ludmila recalled how he'd gone to extraordinary lengths to protect the heroine. Kroos reacted with surprise, clearly not expecting his actions to be so memorable. Finally, Rion offered her help, but Ludmila calmly asked her to leave the boy with them. Sariella meanwhile addressed Cross with a confident tone, asking him not to worry and promising to let him know if the hero was okay, speaking softly to the brave one. Crows looked dejected and mentally assumed Rione and the others had forgotten their promise. However, she calmly explained that she had gone off to fight the invasion and had never received a single signal from them, which was why everything hadn't gone as planned. She then sincerely apologized and thanked him for his patience, adding that she was ready to help him with any matter if it was within her power. Kroos quickly declared himself innocent. In response, Rione sternly warned him to keep his training a secret, as it was unsafe to remain in the city right now. Ludmila watched the conversation silently, clearly concerned. After this, Kroos panicked and froze, unsure of what to do next. He looked at Riona, who was studying him closely, and finally wondered what he could possibly ask of her. Gathering his courage, he awkwardly admitted that he had quarreled with a girl from the orphanage and had absolutely no idea how to apologize so that she would forgive him. Rione listened to this without interruption, and then someone pointed out that since Alicia was also an adventurer, she could come up with a suitable plan given the situation. Then Rione suddenly perked up and suggested they just go shopping together. Cross hesitated, unable to immediately think of what exactly they needed to buy. In desperation, he began to insist that she couldn't be around someone like him. Rione confidently replied that even if it caused another stir, she didn't see a problem with it. Meanwhile, Ludmila said that she would meet them later in the square near the church, and she would go change, leaving them alone. Cross, clutching the collar of his clothes, blushed and sweated, and then suddenly shuddered, hearing someone's apology for waiting, full of unexpected softness. Alicia appeared suddenly, wrapped in a cloak that concealed her identity. Crows asked in surprise when she had arrived, and someone nearby realized the cloak was a magical item that prevented the wearer from being recognized without their consent. Cross, with a twinge of uneasy apprehension, thought this meeting resembled a secret rendezvous. Rione, however, calmly suggested they go, emphasizing that today was a secret between the two of them. Later, Ludmila and Cross sat on a bench in the town square. She asked him if he often went shopping with anyone as people strolled past. Rione admitted that she had unexpectedly had fun, and Cross said sheepishly that today was the first time he had actually put everything he had learned into practice. She then thoughtfully remarked that it had been a rare experience for her too, simply strolling through the stalls and eating without rushing. Cross agreed, adding that he'd enjoyed it too. Sitting on a bench, they talked about how one of them was constantly traveling to different cities for training and had almost no time for ordinary life, while passers-by walked by indifferently. Under the bell tower, Cross sheepishly rejected the praise, and the girl doubted whether such a gesture could be considered full gratitude or an apology. Cross admitted it was a good opportunity, but he was still hesitant. She asked him what exactly he meant, then curiously inquired about his ideas about heroic deeds and the monsters or worlds he'd encountered. Ludmila hesitated and offered only a brief explanation. Cross reacted with disbelief, declaring it hard to believe, and Rione questioned whether simply hearing such stories was enough to understand anything. Finally, Crows sitting next to Rione recalled the event in the Valley of Calling. Their gazes turned to the furious battle where a warrior fought a giant crocodile, protecting a baby wrapped in cloth, and the sight lingered in their memory. Crows turned around in surprise, hearing praise for daring to confront the Hydra while remaining at level 0. Someone nearby remarked on how odd he seemed and expressed disbelief at his calm reaction to his tales of battle. He hesitated, unsure of what to say and visibly embarrassed, while Rione calmly inquired about the reason for his state. Kroos admitted that after all the help from those around him, Elysia's harsh words toward him seemed especially unexpected. He reacted to this with confusion again, but Rione smiled softly and made it clear that his action in trying to protect her looked truly honorable. A little later, Kroos awkwardly thanked him for the day, and Rione, turning away, said it was time for her to go back. They stood near a bench where someone sat silently nearby, not interfering with the conversation. Before parting, Kroos advised the fair-haired figure to make peace with the hot-tempered child, and in response heard a request to let her know how everything would work out with the sweets. Then he stopped in the middle of the human stream and looked around in surprise as the cloaked figure walked away, leaving behind the comment that she had been unable to apologize or express gratitude. Later, a commotion erupted in the living room. A group of people were animatedly discussing the delivery, surprised that even Hagino Moon had fans. Some wondered who the package was from, while others remarked on the sender's attentiveness. One of the boys explained that the letter was from Cross and intended for Giselle. The others listened attentively, realizing that this could change a lot. Meanwhile, Rione flared up with irritation and accused someone of making fun of her, while in the background they were hastily warning not to touch something clearly questionable. Ludmila abruptly asserted herself as the head of the orphanage group and angrily condemned the classless student, believing that he had ruined her reputation. With a stern, determined gaze, Rion promised a harsh punishment, after which the confident woman inquired about the progress of preparations. A man nearby hastily reported that suitable assignments had already been reserved nearby. Kroos listened attentively as the spiky-haired girl described the decrease in weaker beasts in the western forests. She suggested that a third-tier minor demon might be causing the disturbance. Rione remarked with dry sarcasm that it was easy to blame the monster when the inexperienced fighters were nearly wiped out. Meanwhile, Kroos stood in front of the tall building, steeling himself. Soon he was swinging his sword with gusto, completely immersed in his training. Telemaya teased him, noticing his particular fascination today, and asked if something had happened at school. Kroos was breathing heavily and sweating profusely, but he still assured them that there was nothing to worry about, as they had enough spare weapons for training. Rion expressed mild concern about having to pay for her own swords, while Ludmila calmly decided that this was a good reason to adjust her training program. Following this, an announcement was made that he would now conduct training duels with a single mentor, and that his skill development would be entirely under the control of Ludmila and Telemaya. This caused considerable surprise. Kroos, sweating profusely, asked in surprise if he would be taught magic. Telemaya chuckled and teased that Rion had finally stopped hogging all the attention. Ludmila explained that they would begin demonstrating skills from different classes, starting with relatively simple wind magic. Then she confidently suggested that they begin the lesson immediately. In conclusion, Ludmila explained in detail how to connect the magic of the outer world with one's own, strengthening the sensation of wind through constant practice. Kroos reacted with astonishment, realizing the scale of this new stage and experiencing an anxious yet curious anticipation. Kroos spun around rapidly, while Telemaya mockingly remarked that he should train more often in this state. His effectiveness would immediately increase. He flushed and snapped that this was complete nonsense and that she was clearly making fun of him. Almost immediately, a different sensation washed over him. He was using offensive magic for the first time and couldn't hide his delight. Rion stood nearby, saying nothing, only calmly observing him with an appraising gaze. Kroos haltingly praised Ludmila for her training, and she explained that while magic was powerful, it required a long cast and a cooldown. Used correctly, it should significantly expand his fighting style. Sariella intervened and ordered them to closely monitor the battle and anticipate the situation. Rione briefly acknowledged her understanding, but Kroos remained silent, processing what he'd just heard. Then Ludmila noticed that he was much more powerful in close combat than they had initially assumed. Upon hearing that the training had taken only 2 days of his school break, Rion admitted that his growth rate seemed abnormally rapid. Rion asked when the top-level specialists would arrive for an assessment. Sariella replied that they were expected in a few days, and Kroos wondered if they would finally find out what exactly was happening to him. From above, a detailed view of the city opened up, and someone mentally noted the mastery of the mentors, recalling such rare abilities as compensation for magical attacks and control of external mana. Later, Kroos stood confidently in front of the group and explained that until recently he had been completely useless, but now he was mastering the skills of a mage and a monk, along with the techniques of a swordsman. Inspired, he showed off his new weapon and proudly declared that he had acquired another blade and was ready for the next challenge. However, he then sat down, turned away, and admitted with irritation that he had reached rock bottom and did not understand how he was now going to replenish his savings. Soon, a crowd gathered at the Adventurers Guild notice board. Someone loudly declared that newcomers would still have to earn money by completing quests. On the board itself were announcements about rising prices for monster meat, a search for a squad outside the city, a reduction in the number of creatures in the western forests, and unrest near the border of the Eastern Empire. The group was disgruntled about all the paid missions being outside the city. One noted that newcomers needed a minimum party of 5, while another lamented the lack of a partner for mock battles and squad formation. They called out to Kroos, noticing him walking along with his arms moving strangely and groaning softly. He sheepishly replied that he was simply looking for an easy task, then confirmed that the treat for Giselle had been delicious and had indeed pleased her. After a brief pause, he cautiously asked if she had forgiven him. She responded with a smile, offering to go on missions with him, adding that everything was most likely fine by now. Kroos awkwardly thanked her for the sweets that helped calm Giselle, and someone else's voice separately expressed gratitude to Elysia for the fact that her gift worked so well. Before leaving, the apprentice knight assigned roles. He would go in the vanguard, Aaron and Corey would cover the rear, and Dadu and Kroos were to stay close, guarding the back rows. As they prepared to leave, one reminded them that a ranger was vital for detecting monsters, and a water mage would be their primary means of defense. Someone nodded nervously in agreement. Already on the road, Kroos cautiously informed his leader that there were fewer monsters in the western forest because stronger ones had wandered there. In response, he warned them that they were straying from the path and asked if this was permissible. Finally, the group discussed the threat level. One confidently declared that with a good tracker, there wouldn't be any serious problems, and the others agreed, deciding they could handle the situation. They deliberated briefly and decided to go deeper into the forest, as their usual routes no longer led to encounters with monsters. After a brief hesitation, one of them finally agreed to this risky plan. Soon, the squad stopped at the top of a hill. One confidently confirmed that they had chosen the right spot, while the other noted with doubt that it was suspiciously quiet and there were no signs of the monsters. Kroos raised his sword warily, adopting a defensive stance, and asked in confusion what was going on. Disgruntled voices echoed behind him, wondering why he still hadn't figured out the situation. He then abruptly declared that it had all been planned to break the other man. In response, an indignant protest was heard. The opponent insisted he was worthy of the title of adventurer and accused Kroos of eternal daydreaming and being detached from reality. Rion intervened with open anger, declaring that she would not tolerate ridicule, much less defeat, from a man without class. She directly accused her interlocutor of tarnishing her public image during the exam and made it clear that she was indifferent to his future fate. At that moment, a determined man rushed forward with a cry of attack. The two men nearby instantly prepared to defend themselves, while the girl at their side frantically signaled for caution. Before Kroos could react, someone angrily told him that contempt deprives him of everything: access to training, good missions, and education. It was emphasized that the losses were endless and everything would have to be won anew. The tension grew and the group stared at each other with heavy, oppressive gazes. One of them pointed out the arrogant expression on his opponent's face, emphasizing how such looks hurt more than words. Kroos retorted sharply, explaining that such things corrode the mind like poison, stealing confidence and slowly breaking a person. He insisted that it would ruin him both as an adventurer and as a person. Clutching his sword, he wondered if those around him were truly prepared to take this so seriously. Someone behind him momentarily wondered about Giselle's reputation and how it all appeared from the outside. Meanwhile, Sariella began to chant the purification spell with concentration. Kroos watched her with surprise and alarm, sensing that something important was happening. Almost immediately, the young mage unleashed a powerful water attack, minor water magic, water cannon. The reaction of those around him was immediate and stunned. Kroos, gasping for breath but not retreating, remembered that it was thanks to Riona and the others that he had even reached this starting point. He silently swore he wouldn't let himself fall here. With fierce determination, he turned to the air currents, commanding them to obey and take the weight off his arms, while demanding that he hold the line at any cost. A bolt of wind, cold as a winter blast, formed in his palm. The two men behind him froze, watching the attack take shape. He hastily called upon the spirit of the wind to gather together, squeeze the sky in his fist, and unleash a crushing shot upon the enemy. The squad reacted with shock and disbelief when it became clear that Kroos was indeed using magical skills. Rion and the others watched from afar with alarm and genuine amazement. With his sword in his hand, he froze for a moment, stunned by what was happening, while Rion, drenched in sweat, with the same tenacity commanded the air to finish what she had started. Kroos shouted the name of the move, Wind Shot, and charged, feeling the opponent's coordination begin to crumble. A frightened cry rang out somewhere off to the side. But the next moment something else struck him. The magic suddenly froze in the air and dissipated. He froze in shock, while the two nearby stared, equally stunned, at the hovering, slowly fading, swirling cloud. Kroos reacted with both shock and anger, sharply questioning why he'd even used magic. In response, the confident woman calmly revealed that she, too, had a hidden trump card, one she'd kept hidden until now. Then he learned from the same confident girl that her unique skill was called Charming Magic. She immediately asked if he knew about it before, carefully observing his reaction. Kroos, crouched with his back to a tree, heard a confident Ludmila challenge him. She declared that the only way to break the deadlock was to use the magic he was so proud of, and bluntly demanded he shoot her. He responded with a mixture of fear and anger, realizing that Giselle's unique magic was capable of seizing control of mana. His words suggested that such an advantage seemed unfair. Meanwhile, Rion approached Kroos, who was hiding behind a tree while the others prepared to attack. He clenched his fist and decided to unleash all his pent-up power into a volumetric air attack to relieve the oppressive tension once and for all. He urgently commanded his hand to become a projectile and strike the enemy, but Rion angrily shouted at him, calling it useless recklessness. The armored man next to him reacted with genuine surprise. Giselle quickly urged everyone not to panic and explained that the enemy was trying to crush them one by one. Others noted that he had retreated deeper into the forest, emphasizing that he was physically weaker than her. After that, the group quickly discussed a plan, split into two groups and encircled the target. Everyone was confident they knew this forest better than the others and were determined not to let the enemy escape. Ludmilla ordered Riona to begin the search, threateningly declaring that she would block his escape routes. Yet she couldn't shake the thought that failure could cost them all expulsion. Suddenly, Cross, Aaron, and another man froze in confusion when Aaron touched his head and asked what was going on. The man next to him wondered out loud what had happened to Aaron, while the sound of breaking earth echoed in the background. Aaron noticed the ground around him looked like it had been plowed. He then called out urgently to Corey, asking if he was okay, and they both lay on the ground, completely exhausted. Ludmilla, sweating profusely, realized with horror that they were facing a stone warrior lizard, a level 28 threat, incomparably superior to ordinary low-risk opponents. Everyone faced the enormous, overwhelming creature and couldn't understand why such a powerful enemy had appeared here. They assumed it had survived the demonic invasion, and it became clear that only they could stop it. Ludmilla immediately ordered Aaron and Corey to be carried into the thicket as they were wounded. She ordered the others to cover each other, keep their distance, and retreat, while someone shouted for them to keep moving and clear a path. Despite her wounds, Ludmilla kept moving, thinking they still had a chance to escape at this rate. The two men ran ahead in panic, fleeing from the enormous creature pursuing them with a deafening roar. Soon she was exhausted and could hardly catch her breath, cursing her own weakened legs that prevented her from fighting as she was accustomed to. Lying on the ground and looking at the devastated space in front of her, she thought that no matter the outcome, someone would be sacrificed, and it was impossible to change that. Even wounded, Ludmilla decided she could buy herself time with her body. The thought flashed through her mind that the enemy had probably figured something out and was now glad of the escape. Somewhere in the distance, an image surfaced in my memory. A little boy excitedly telling his sister that he dreamed of becoming an adventurer, and she responded with a warm smile and encouraged him to try his best. Returning to reality, Kroos lay wounded on the ground and painfully apologized to his sister for never being able to become an adventurer. She held him tightly next to his broken sword, never letting go for a moment. She stood before the colossal monster, bitterly thinking that dying at the hands of a classless, worthless man would be a shameful end. The thought that she had never had time to atone for this outcome burned more than fear. Meanwhile, onlookers gathered around, discussing the chaotic state of their leader and wondering how the other orphans would be treated now. The girl with the cat ears bowed her head silently, her lips pressed together in stubborn determination. The girl with long blonde hair raised her sword and accepted her fate. She realized she had spent her entire life defending her position in the harshest possible manner, and now she saw this as the price she had paid for her choice. Cross anxiously asked if Giselle was injured as the massive beast began to crumble nearby. Debris fell around them, heightening the tension and creating a sense of impending disaster. Ludmilla sharply demanded to know why he was helping her at all. Kroos, cringing, couldn't understand his own actions, and she reminded him that just recently she had been the one trying to break him. Sweating and angry with himself, he explained that he had blinded the creature with a blast of wind and driven it into a stone wall. However, there was almost no visible damage, and one of the girls watched silently, shocked by what was happening. Kroos and Rione found themselves face to face with the monster and quickly realized they were outnumbered. They hesitated between trying to save their wounded leg and fleeing, knowing that direct combat with such an adversary would be tantamount to suicide. Rione angrily shouted that she understood the situation perfectly well. A furious warning rang out in response that there would be no victory here and that they needed to retreat immediately before the death toll mounted. His trembling hand gripped his sword, and the thought of dying without his mentor's protection surfaced in his mind. Despite this, he resolved to face the battle head-on, refusing to let terror take over. Kroos clenched his fists and thought that now he had to be like a hero. Rione supported him, urging him to become a strong adventurer, ready to come to the aid of those in need. He desperately explained that if he left her now, he would never again be able to look into the eyes of someone he admired. She listened, shocked, not expecting such words. With sword in hand, Kroos rushed at the monster, shouting that he simply could not do otherwise. The blow sent one of the figures flying backward, off balance. He struggled to hold the weapon, aware of how heavy it was at that moment. The beast looked at him with an almost perplexed expression, as if appreciating his audacity. The monster's thick armor made a frontal attack deadly. Although Kroos could dodge the blows, he lacked the strength to make a decisive impact at close range, requiring a more careful plan. Surrounded by flames, he prepared to strike at the large lizard-like creature, remembering how the Moan of Twilight fell to the ground and sank deep into the soil. Ludmilla realized with amazement that he still had some magic left. Kroos, meanwhile, looked at his roaring enemy, sensing how he was trying to crush his will with his mere presence. He cast a low-level black spell to defend himself from the armored giant's attack, focusing fully as the threat loomed just steps away. Someone quickly explained that defensive exit was a magical skill that lowered an opponent's defense. Its drawbacks were its short range and the need for a chant, but it was indispensable in close combat. Exhausted, Kroos leaned on the surface and realized that his new skills, Windshot and Defensive Exit, were only level 1. He realized he couldn't lower the enemy's defense below level 4. Almost exhausted, he struggled on, clinging to every step. Despite the fatigue and pain, a stubborn desire to protect and achieve his goal, no matter the cost, raged within him. Kroos angrily declared that he'd had enough of his eternal impotence and dependence on others. His stat sheet lay on the ground nearby, a silent reminder of how long he'd considered himself a nobody. At that very moment, a single figure lunged forward at the massive armored foe, shouting a heavy incantation. The words called for the Moen of Twilight to fall to the ground and forced the broken pity to bow its head. Kroos felt energy gathering in his palm. He mentally commanded that the entire sky be held, transformed into a projectile, and directed at the enemy. He then let out a furious cry and released a powerful wind shot, infusing it with a curse so that the enemy would collapse and be pinned under the weight of his own power. Ludmila sharply warned that mindless use of skills would only exhaust him faster, but the battle had already escalated. The monster roared and the attacking figure refused to retreat, forcing a brutal exchange of blows. Kroos gripped his sword and prepared to deliver another blow at the roaring monster. This time, he was determined to follow through and not retreat. Ryon froze in shock, realizing something incredible. Meanwhile, Kroos struck again and again, noticing that his momentum was not waning, despite his expectations and fatigue. One of the fighters stood firm as the monster's roar echoed behind him. At that moment, it became clear every time the enemy used a skill, its power increased dramatically, making the fight ever more dangerous. Ryon wondered out loud whether it was possible for a skill to spontaneously accelerate skill growth to exist. Ludmila replied that she hadn't encountered such a thing before, though she knew of many unique abilities with strange, highly targeted effects. Kroos, still in the air, unleashed another attack, while the monster below roared, shocked by a force it had never encountered before. At that moment, his unique ability, Cinderella Grey Longing, was revealed. Even Ludmila was stunned, admitting she'd never heard of it, and someone nearby wondered how, with such a skill, Kroos had been considered useless for so long.